Welcome to the SEO Insider with your host, Seth Price, founder of BluShark, taking you inside the world of legal marketing and all things digital.
Welcome back to the SEO Insider. Today, I'm very excited to have Daniel Steinberg, the founder and CEO of Lawbrokr. In the world of SEO, it's important to understand where traffic is coming from on your website. Many players start with live chat on their website, and nowadays many people are using AI as a way to enhance that. Daniel's here to explain how Lawbrokr fits into that puzzle to improve lead qualification. What a lot of people sort of they think of like this piece of their website might have started off with a live chat agent, very often for the Philippines, that may have morphed for many people to an AI chat. How do you guys comport with that world?
Yeah, so we're a secondary way to engage. So I think as the way that I think about this as a whole unit is there's this verse of pre-qualification and pre-screening. That's the world that we play into. Your website is your core source of truth. It's driving traffic. Lawbrokr acts as a conversion event. So there's three core ways that a potential client might want to engage with you. And at the end of the day, you want to meet your clients where they are. So they're either going to phone you, which everyone has, a phone line, intake staff, and everything in between. They're either going to chat with you if you have a chatbot, or they're going to engage with you on those big call to action buttons like schedule your consultation, free case review, et cetera, et cetera. Lawbrokr sits on those buttons throughout the internet to create a journey to help guide the client down a path of quiz-like workflows, so that Lawbrokr can capture standard and repeatable data from your clients every single time.
What would you say the percentage of people that use random buttons on their website versus integrations into like a paid social? Like, do you do both, or is this really dedicated to just the law firm websites?
Yeah, so unlike a physical chatbot that's embedded on a law firm's website, our hypothesis and thesis is that clients are finding you in a magnitude of different ways. So like you just mentioned, social posts, paid posts, Google My Business, Avo, FindLaw, etc., referral sources, so on and so forth.
Are you part of like a Google My Business profile chat where somebody could chat with, when that's available, that's or a Google Business, LSA chat? Like, where do you guys?
So we're not the chat function. We would sit where a hyperlink would sit. So Lawbrokr's a hyperlink. So think about, pricebenowitz.com. Lawbrokr is a function of that. And that allows you to place Lawbrokr links anywhere across the internet. So again, that could be on Google My Business profile. That could be on social posts, YouTube, TikTok, Google AdWords, landing pages, you name it. And that's the structure that we take on to allow you to create a standardization of the way that clients engage with you.
Awesome. So, as you've gone through this process of giving people this opportunity, and look, I've seen it myself, is that anything, old school started off wanting everybody on the phone because that's where we sold our business to, okay, chat's there. I didn't love the big stuff that popped up on a screen, and as mobile became more, it was always the quality of the chats wasn't great, but it was a necessary evil. Mm-hmm. As we've seen the AI chats come in, it seems that law firms' willingness to work with some version of either a script and or AI or whatever you want to call it has gone through the roof in the last couple of years as we A/B test these things. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace as you've created these flows to bring people through in a way that used to be sort of foreign, because people before, if you ask somebody, 3-4 years ago, they wanted that live personal touch. And I think they've gotten a lot more comfortable with something that is outside of human hands.
Yeah. Very fair comment. And I think that there's still validity in that, right? I think the human touch is incredibly important in a world of professional services and, competing with your competitors throughout the space. I think for us, the way that we envision it and share that passion with law firms is, how do you make sure that you activate a new channel of growth for your business? So we're not going to replace the phone calls. If people want to chat with you, we're not going to replace that. But how do you start to elevate your business to create a more conducive experience that people are used to, that emulates consumer buying habits, like purchasing something on a Shopify store or Amazon or a TikTok and Instagram quiz. You need to essentially create and evolve in the way that consumers are engaging across every discipline, not just, professional services, in order to capture that client growth in a much more streamlined way. So that's where our business comes into play. But again, it's all about activating that new channel of growth. If you want to get referrals, keep getting referrals. If you get phone calls, keep getting phone calls. How do we make sure that we replace those static contact forms that create bounce rates, friction, and poor quality data for your intake teams?
I love it, because to me, that's always been one of the weaker places. Even design, I was always yelling at our team, like, these forms are just not very exciting. They're necessary evil, but they had not evolved. I felt like they were still back in 2010. They had not given you that pop that said, hey, there's something more here. And that as people expect instant gratification, very often when you send a form in, you have no idea if it's ever going anywhere. And the fact that there's some sort of back and forth, whether it's gamification or multiple questions, gives you, I use this analogy a lot in hiring and in client acquisition. There's a lot of sort of a dating analogy. If you walked into a bar and met somebody and said, will you marry me? They'd think you're crazy. But if you have a drink, you have dinner, you spend some time with them, all of a sudden there's a relationship. And that at some level, what I see you guys doing on a micro piece is having a mini relationship with somebody where some questions are being asked, they're giving information. There's a back and forth at scale that you couldn't possibly do with humans at that, or may not even be wished to be. There's not a desire to speak to a human, but that back and forth means all of a sudden it's something more than I found a site and I filled out a form, but that there's some sort of, dynamic interaction, which I think creates the beginnings. It's not replacing the eventual human touch, but that it's more than I found it, here's a form, let me hope they call me back, but rather with that back and forth, there's some sort of depth, minute as it may be, better than the static that we've been living with.
Yeah. And I think you raise a really important point, and part of the consumer journey in legal and why we're tackling that space outside of, my background at Clio and so forth, is there's this broken element of education within the legal space. As being a practicing attorney, I'm just an outsider looking in. But when you think about the lack of education, one of the biggest challenges and why people don't necessarily call, and 78% of them start their search on Google, is a lot of them are unfamiliar whether they even have a case, or if you can support them, or if they even have a legal matter, right? They don't know that there's a statute of limitations on time range or jurisdictional based elements and so forth, because they've never engaged with an attorney before. So part of our platform helps allow to guide that client journey to facilitate a better conversation on the back end to build that personal touch. So a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to replace my phone calls or my team calling the individual. And what I say back to that is absolutely not. What you have to do is take the data that Lawbrokr provides you and create that sort of experience that makes them want to work with you, right? And the more data you have, the more likely you can ultimately support their legal matter, or quite frankly, tell them verbatim, here's why we can't help you. Here's how you can, we can refer you out, or, go to your local state bar and so forth.
Right. So I see two different ends of the spectrum. For somebody with limited numbers of calls, they would want as much as they could in theory, straight to the phone. But one of the banes of every law firm's existence is the quality of intake. I'm not immune to that. I've had periods of time it's great. I've had periods of time it sucks. I've had periods of time when I thought it was great and it was meh. And so the thought that you are adding something, and we're seeing this with AI more and more, where it's not like you're not going to have any employees, but if you could reduce the number and friction so that if you got rid of your worst 20% of potential calls in some way, so that your people could deal with the 80% that were there, you get to eliminate your worst performing intake person.
Yeah.
And me, or if it's a single person, it frees them up to spend more time on the quality stuff.
Yeah.
So
you're creating prioritization for them, like you just mentioned, right? It's like, where do I focus my time now? And how do I make sure that the people that might be tire kickers or aren't a good fit, I deal with thereafter, right? Because it's speed to lead.
Right. So back in the day when I would send a lead to a lawyer, or it was me way back in the day with a cell phone 20 years ago, I would want to know, is this worth stepping away from the dinner table for? Or is this stuff that could wait? And in a way, you're doing this at scale, giving people an idea of what they're dealing with. I know that for some of your clients, probably eliminating somebody entirely, if that pre-vetting can get them out of the loop and keep them away from you because you can't help them. I assume that as you move into things like mass torts, where there's massive volume of potential callers who think they may or may not, if you're able to pre-vet and predetermine, it gives your intake a fighting chance. Because if every person that had a potential thought of a case was touching your intake department, it would likely collapse. And very few people are good enough to scale it, so that as you leave stuff, in auto, it's usually pretty clear. There's an accident, there's not an accident, right? But as you move into the more eclectic areas, there's often, like, if we could pre-vet in a way that doesn't lose people, this is the other piece of this, right? So that if you go back historically, I've never wanted to have many obstacles between getting somebody on the phone and, that you didn't want there to be a huge moat that somebody could climb out of. And so that as it gets more elegant and it's not something that's obnoxious, like the phone tree, right?
Yeah.
Those phone trees are great until you get frustrated, start hitting zero and want to get the hell out of it, right? So, you're seeing stuff more and more with AI voice. For example, I feel like what you've come up with is a more elegant solution that if you're in the digital environment already and comfortable with it, a couple of button clicks can bring you the gold and eliminate the stuff you really don't want to be dealing with.
Yeah. It also creates, a lot of firms are consistently looking for ways to compete, right? And have that competitive advantage. It's a completely different experience when a consumer is shopping around and, filling out a static form that you're like, hey, I'm not sure what happened here, compared to someone actually clicking through, getting that follow-up, seeing the automated sequencing and so forth, to then know that, you're taken care of. This feels warm and fuzzy, like things I'm used to.
It was the dating part I was talking about. Like, you're asking the right questions. If somebody on a date starts being bizarro and saying things that don't resonate, it's gonna end very quickly. And so the idea is, if you could theoretically give those touch points that you can, that you care about family, that you love to travel, whatever it is, if you're giving that back and forth, which people do, at least I'm old, so it was back in the day, it was a website, now it's an app. If you can somehow have those positive touch points to know that at least the deal killers aren't there, that, if you don't want to have kids and you're able to know that the person you're about to have dinner with doesn't want to have kids, then you have a lot better chance. Now, there are exceptions to everything, just like in dating. You might find out that despite somebody answering wrong for whatever reason, and that's true with law firms. It may be that in this process, you lose 1 out of 100 things. You know what? I would have loved to have spoken to them, but the dirty secret is that if you had 100 of those phone calls coming in and had to screen them, you might not ever find that out. And so the idea is, if you can spend your intake time with the people most likely to have the need you can solve, it just exponentially changes. Because half my podcast guests are talking about intake. It's so huge. And we had a whole series on the Law Firm Blueprint this summer with intake people. It's impossible to do, and that anything we can do to get meatier stuff, because when you do that, you can pay your people more, because in theory, your conversion rate is going to be higher. And each of these things synergistically moves along that spectrum.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about like conversion rate on the retainer side and things like that, because it's all looked at a framework of a funnel, right? And, you at BluShark and so forth are reviewing this and analyzing this across all your customer bases. But you talk a lot about pre-screening and vetting people out and so forth. And that's part of this solution that we solve for. But the other piece is, when you create experiences that make it simplified for the user to engage with you and guide them down that path, it actually ends up bringing a higher amount of growth into your practice, but also with higher quality, right? So you're removing the high volume, poor quality data and replacing that with high intent and higher volume in that capacity.
And as long as it's not going to turn you off. I remember when the chats first started, it was popped up. They still don't love the big video chats. What they don't tell you is what percentage of people get turned off and leave because that invasive piece. If somebody is in the position where they're asking for the information by hitting that button, they're already going into that channel versus we don't even get to that discussion. So the question is, if you're going to be going to that form fill, what can you do that is not like, I'll go to a negative version of it. I don't know. We get surveyed by everything. Hotels you stay at, restaurants, resorts, cruise, whatever it is. And, it's one of those deals where I'm good for 2 or 3 questions, but when it goes on forever, I'm just like, I'm out of here. Like I really wanted to support this resort, but like, hey guys, enough's enough. It's not my business, it's yours. I'll give you the feedback. If there's something wrong, I'll let you know. But like, I feel like if the more elegant and streamlined it becomes, the less of an impediment it is, and the more that you're working with them towards a solution rather than, hey, I'm just trying to do competitive research right now to find out all the information I can.
Right. And it's an interesting point that you make, right? Because it's kind of like pre-sales and post-sales. And there's a big distinction between that in my world that I look at, right? So our average question set that we've seen on the data side before people start to bounce and fall through is somewhere in the realm of 7 to 9 questions. It depends on, the specific service offering, et cetera, that you're looking at. And naturally, each firm has their own data sets, so they can determine what that looks like. But you're describing a world where it's like, okay, I just had a great experience. I just went on that cruise. I had a ton of fun. It was 2 weeks, but now I'm back at work. So don't feed me with 10 questions. You asked me if I wanted a review. I'll give you 5 stars, but then it makes you answer 7 more questions, like to describe your experience and why and this and how and whatever. And you're like, post sale, I'm done. I was happy with that. Thank you very much. I'm off. Right.
Right. And you can see, if you've been on a cruise, it has gotten to the point where that is the currency. It's gone from like a joke to literally the cruise director is spending 5 minutes of an infomercial. It's like the only thing that matters more than a monetary tip.
Right.
And to the point where, okay, we've put that together. But that's one thing. You just spent a week with people. But you could have an interaction in a restaurant for an hour, or you stayed at a hotel where you barely talked to anybody. You got a room key and you left. And all of a sudden there's this barrage. So the idea that you can sort of quasi gamify it and be given the permission to give more when you want to or not, to me, I think that's the future, which is if you can somehow make it desirous rather than laborious, I think you're going to get more out of people. And then at some point, somebody's like, look, you can, if you go down 3 or 4 questions and say, somebody's like, look, I got nothing better to do today. I'll answer all the questions you want. Great. Yeah. But separating that out so that the people that you want, who are the busy people who probably have the money to spend, rather than the person who was treated to the cruise who wasn't making that buying decision. I'm making this up. But the idea is, as you can be more elegant and thoughtful about that journey, I think you're going to get more. No different than with intake. If you can get 3 or 4 questions from somebody, that's a lot of powerful information to pass
You're
forward.
You're going to be a lot smarter, a lot more relatable. You can describe the situation. I think like it's all cyclical, right? And it all, I always say the review starts at the first click. So what's interesting is a lot of law firms focus on, okay, well, how do we optimize our time? One of the things that I see all the time on reviews for law firm sites and things like that is like, you get a 1-star review, which isn't warranted, but it's because they didn't pick up the phone because they weren't a good fit for them. Or they're like, hey, we can't help you. And that bothers consumers, right? In our world, it's like, if we can describe why we can't help you, like, hey, you're outside of our state, or hey, your accident happened 5 years ago. This actually isn't a legal matter, or et cetera, et cetera. I'm, talking at ad nauseum here. But the point of the matter is that it also sets the client up for success, right? It saves their time. It offers them.
I think that's huge. Sorry to cut you off, but to me, that's huge in the sense that the negative review generally comes from the human interaction. You don't see a lot of negative reactions from a bot that's giving, because there are 2 reasons you get the negative reaction. One, somebody genuinely was flippant, which happens, right? Which hopefully this will eliminate. The other is they don't want the bad news.
Yeah.
And I will take the odds that a website is that something amorphous is telling you no is likely better than whatever your eighth most talented intake person is going to do to drop somebody off nicely.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to get to the point where you're doing some big stuff, I know, with the wildfires and stuff like that, and that there's going to be a lot of people you can't help. And if you don't waste their time and let them know, hey, this is not going to be your solution road to riches, try somewhere else, you never get into that engagement that will lead to bad stuff. And to me, that's very valuable.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Awesome. So as we wrap up here, what are you most excited about? I got what's going on here, but what is in this space of the client journey and the intersection between, the marketing, the client, and the sign up?
Yeah.
If I'm looking down the road, everybody's talking AI, what is coming that we should be excited for?
In the space or in Lawbrokr or both?
However you want to do it.
Yeah, I think the space is really unique. I think there's this big shift in focus on how people want to engage with law firms and making sure that law firms are primed for success in that capacity and have digitized their practices beyond the scope of just a marketing agency and just a website, right? There's so many different pieces in place that you have to have in order to make sure that you're capturing the right types of clients in the right way in a magnitude of different sources, right? I see people post all the time now that people are searching on ChatGPT for attorneys near me and moving off of the Google world. Like, there are so many new sources of truth that might exist that you need to be if you want to capture the right types of clients. And I think that's a really exciting function, because if you can't get the front end side of things working properly and buzzing and humming, the intake piece doesn't really matter because there's no one coming into your funnel. And this whole focus around top of funnel growth seems to be a really hot topic. And, in your world on the BluShark side, and
No, 100%. So to me, the issue with top of funnel growth is that it's overwhelming. That wave could knock you out if you don't have some barriers up, because you couldn't possibly. It's what the mass tort guys do. Free money. Everybody wants it. What is that barrier to protect the beach from just being consumed by that incredible tidal wave?
Yeah, so I think that space is super exciting. Obviously, that's the space that we play in, but I think every law firm that has now built their practices or are building their practices are really in tune to building the infrastructure of the back end of their firm, and how to practice on the practice management side, and how to focus on the document management side, and et cetera. And what needs to start shifting is, how do we operate like other corporations in other industries in order to make a big splash and magnitude of how people engage with us throughout our world? And that's missing on the legal side.
I think you landed the plane. It's like, how can law firms operate like the rest of the business community, which always we're like, we're different. Well, we're not really that different. We have media, and we want signups or new clients. So thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see you, whether at tech show, I assume, if not before.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see each other running around as we always do. I'm not sure. I have a crazy conference schedule, so I'm sure we'll be bumping into each other shortly. And otherwise, I'll be coming down to Washington to see you.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. See you later, Seth. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the SEO Insider with Seth Price. Be sure to check back next week for fresh insights into building your brand's online presence. Episodes are available to stream directly on BluShark Digital's website.